Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Phil, we usually start the show by saying, oh, that was a busy week in the car retailing sector. But I think we can justifiably say that this week because of the announcement of the electric car grant, which is pretty massive, pretty significant, and still a tad unclear.
Yeah, I think clearly, there was a lot of rumours over the weekend. Predominantly, that it was obviously around their infrastructure investment. I think was it 63 or 68 million was that, and some of it going to the NHS around this transition for electrification in sort of ambulances, etc., and then some to the curbside charging, etc. And then it came out that there was this potentially 700 million coming out towards the some kind of incentive, and then obviously it broke with the 650 million. So that has triggered a lot of conversations this week, to say the least, and a lot of media coverage through every channel, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, and it put you on television as well, didn't it? You were on Sky News?
Sky News, yeah, I had a brief. And I say brief, you probably, someone said, did you not have a shave? I said, it'd probably take me longer to have a shave than the actual time I was on being interviewed, to be fair with you. But no, it was Sky News, but their Business Live, which was their sort of headline update session. So it was got invited on, but then, clearly it was a case that I wanted to try and get the point across about the used car market rather than just the new, which we'll get on to later, because as you can imagine, a few of our stories headlines today are incorporating the grant. Within it.
We have a couple of shout-outs, starting with Ben's 120th anniversary celebrations. Now, you actually went to the launch of this particular initiative, didn't you? Because the celebrations have started at Ben, and what were they talking about there?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was setting out that new. I mean, we've talked about it a couple of times on the podcast, haven't we? On recent sort of weeks, with obviously Rachel Cliff taking over that CEO role, and subsequently, more recently since her appointment, making that sort of that exec structure, the new appointees and new structure at the board there, trustees and board. So she was setting the scene as to what they are trying to do, what they want to do, how they're going to move forward. Obviously, they've got areas of the business that they've let go recently because of the costs and strains on Ben, which is their aftercare facility that was a big strain, but no, really setting the scene out. It was a great day. It was great to see Rachel and members of her team on the day. It was very hot. It was on a hot day last Thursday, but no, it was a great day, great event, and I think there's a story in AM Online about it, isn't there?
There's a really good story which sort of sums up what Ben's initiative is, what they're doing to mark the 120th anniversary. So we'll include a link to that story in the newsletter, which goes out on Monday. And it did remind me of 20 years ago when it was Ben's 100th anniversary. It was also the 100th anniversary of Skoda and Motor Trader, and that's when I was editing Motor Trader. So the three of us got together and sort of looking at ways that we could make a big splash of it. And we certainly did something big at the awards, the Motor Trader Awards that year. But I can't believe we're now 20 years on.
I'm going to say that, but that seems 20 years ago that you remember that. Yeah. So how time flies, but just to finish off then and say, as Kurt said, it will be on your newsletter feed on Monday morning. But great work that Ben continued to do, and this is clearly about the new strategy, new plans to support Ben. Raise that money that is much needed for Ben to support the automotive sector. It's fantastic work and fantastic news what they're doing, and continue. Let's hope for another 120 years, but I suspect we won't be around to talk about that one, Curtis.
Probably not. Also, this week we caught up with Steve Young, ICDP analyst, and the timing was perfect because it was just after the announcement of the electric car grant. So we had a chat with him about that, and we'll have an extract from that in today's show. But definitely worth checking out the full interview because he did talk about a lot of the topics which are affecting the industry at the moment, including the plight of used EVs and some interesting observations on the best way for dealers to tackle uncertainties. And also he gave us an update on Auto West London, which is the business that he's been running since March, which is the JQ Amoda site in Chiswick. So a timely update on that.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
Headlines this week come from the Financial Times, AM, Motor Trade News and Car Dealer. And as we've already said, the big news this week was the introduction of the electric car grant. So we're actually going to devote the first half of this pod to unpicking some of the ramifications around its launch, looking at the industry feedback and the implications for used EVs. And as I said, we've got a comment from industry analyst Steve Young on that. Then after the break, we've got the latest on Citroen's 120,000 vehicle recall, which sees the Peugeot network lending some workshop capacity. Waylands Automotive has acquired 3 sites from HSH Motor Group, which will see it add 3 new franchises and expand further west into Wales. And Phil, last week I jokingly suggested we should have a regular weekly spot for new Chinese brands coming to the UK. Well, guess what? We've got another one this week.
We have more, yes, we do.
So we thought we'd start this week's show with just looking at some of the bullet points behind the electric car grants that was announced. And starting with last weekend, Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander announced that £63 million worth of funding to help boost the charging infrastructure. And as you already mentioned, some of that money is for local authorities to dig pavement gullies for owners with street parking, plus an additional £30 million to go to vehicle depots such as those used by the NHS. She also admitted in the television interview that she doesn't actually own an EV, but has a 6-year-old ICE vehicle, which I thought was an interesting omission there.
Yes.
And from Monday, so this is when the electric car grant was announced. So it's £650 million. And it was announced following long-running industry calls for incentives for retail buyers. And this effectively replaces the plug-in grant, which was pulled by the last government in 2022. So over and above that, because we have been picking through the sort of details within this. So it's only eligible for new EVs priced under £37,000. And the subsidies based on 2 bands, so up to £1,500 and then £3,750. And that's very much depending on the green and sustainability credentials of the car's production, with participating OEMs now required to have a verified science-based target for carbon reduction. And this is where it kind of goes into a bit of a grey area, and we will pick up on this in the headlines. So the grants was available from Wednesday this week and will run until the 2028-29 financial year. And OEMs have been told by the government to submit eligible models to be considered under the scheme, but has not said how long the approval process will be. So that kind of tees us up to where we are with the electric car grants as we know it, as we record it.
And I think you're right. I think, obviously, the main sentiment at the minute, as you say, Curtis, and we'll get onto a couple of the headlines, is I think is welcomed. I think any money, entering the automotive sector is always welcome, whether that's from Mike Hawes at the SMMT and Toby Poston from the BVLA, and we've got Robert Forrester that we'll talk about shortly. But generally, as you say there, it's very unclear, because it started immediately, was the message coming out of the government. So it was, with immediate effect, that this incentive, this grant, was available. But then subsequently, the manufacturers need to apply for this grant. And as you've said there, that there is an application process where they need to send their request, which is the electric car grant application reference number, and declare intention to apply for the ECG, and then complete and submit the application form with supporting evidence with that. And then the VCA will confirm its validity of type approval certificates and warranty documentation presented as evidence. And then it'll come up with either decides that the application has passed, decides that the application has failed, or requests further information from the applicant. And that, it's basically saying that OZEV will either confirm the applicant passed and is eligible for the highest grant band, which you've said there, Curtis, at 3,750, or confirms that the applicant has passed and is eligible for the second grant band at 1,500, or requests further information, or confirms that it has failed and is ineligible for the grant. And there's lots of rumours about whether the Chinese manufacturers are immediately excluded or not. Is it, and we'll get onto that when we chat with ICDP with Steve Young there, but is it to support domestic brands, of which Steve points out we've only got the Leaf, and that's not in production currently. So it's a bit of an unknown at the minute, but obviously from a retailer perspective, they've got to sell these vehicles.
Yes.
And I've been privy to a letter from an OEM to their dealer network that basically says they welcome the opportunity. This is a Chinese manufacturer, by the way, that they welcome the grant, and they are looking forward to submitting their application for the eligibility of the grant, and that they will be in contact with their dealer network in due course. But with the customer when they walk in that showroom, I'm not quite sure.
Well, this is it, because there will be customers visiting showrooms this weekend. They've heard about the grant. They think, well, yeah, maybe now's the time to actually seriously consider buying an EV. Go into a dealer and see what the deal is. See how much discount, government subsidy they get, and it's far from clear. And just going back to this science-based targets, that this is a sort of an international standard that goes across different industries and is based on achieving net zero by 2050, and specifically for car production, in terms of how the grant is assessed, 70% will be determined by how the battery was produced, and 30% by vehicle assembly. And it will look at things like how electricity is generated in the country that produced either the battery or assembled the car. So there's a lot of granular detail in this, isn't there?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I've gone onto the that Target dashboard, and if you look at Nissan, Nissan has had a commitment, but then had a partial commitment withdrawn. So for their near-term status, it says target is set, but net zero status, it says commitment has been removed. So and it's all a bit.
So we're in a position where Nissan, when they start selling the all-new Leaf next year, those models may not be eligible for the full government discount.
Yeah,
because Nissan hasn't pledged to net zero by 2050, and this is Nissan corporation. This is Japan. So there's there's a lot of detail to pick up as we cover this story. But if we start with the Financial Times, and I do urge you to go over to this story because it's really good at putting things into context, because this was they ran this a couple of days after the announcement when some of the dust had settled, and the headline's quite telling because it's a mess. Car makers face weeks of uncertainty over EV subsidy scheme. And it's saying that the new subsidy scheme designed to boost the sales of EVs has created confusion across the industry, as we've just intimated, and is likely to hit short-term sales and second-hand car prices over the longer term. And it says that the application for the grants kicked off on Wednesday, but car makers will have to wait potentially weeks to learn which of their models will be eligible for the subsidies. And interestingly, within the FT story, it says the cars considered greenest will receive a discount of up to 3,750, while those in the lower band up to 1,500. And I think that up to is key because it's not set at 1,500. But it also says, and I haven't seen this anywhere else, a third band includes most Chinese-made cars will not receive any subsidy.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that's to do with the banding, like the WTO, WLTP bandings and things like this. Is it the M1 passenger, because it's an M1 grading, which is all to do with safety standards and everything else. But yeah, it's getting a bit ambiguous as to what I hear, and I think there's a bit of a thing. And just back to the comment regarding Nissan and the Nissan Leaf, there is a sentence in this story saying only Nissan has said its new electric Leaf model, which will produce at its Sunderland plant, will likely to be eligible.
Yeah,
so
but
that's a question.
Yes, but for which band?
Well, there.
Yeah.
It's still a question whether it will or it won't be. So, and yeah, so it's, but they say it's a great story and kind of sums it all up very well in the FT there. And it's, I think they do talk about it in this. So you've got James Buxton, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at Car 360, the UK's largest independent EV specialist, said that the scheme should have been designed in a way that it could be implemented straight away, since many customers would wait to buy or lease EVs until it became clear which models will become cheaper, which is what we've just been covering there.
Yeah.
And the stimulus is good, but it would have been much better to have balance between new and used EVs, because you need to get a healthy used car market to support the residual values, which is what we've been talking about quite a bit. And one of the things I was trying to get across on the Sky News interview, that the potential impact, because if you're a consumer that you bought a new car last week, and then this week you can get another 3,750 off it, or, is this going to be passed down to the consumer? We don't know. But again, the full interview with Steve does cover a little bit of that conversation.
Yeah, and also one of the unknowns is what the OEMs will do with their incentives. So at the moment, there's a lot of 0% APR or low percent APR deals available for retail buyers. Can we expect to see them being phased out once the grant is available? We don't know at the moment. So it could be that consumers are in a position to actually buy an EV today, which will actually be cheaper in the long run than waiting for the subsidy, because they'll be able to get it on 0% APR. So there's all these things flying around at the moment, all these considerations. And if you're in the market for an EV, where do you start?
Well, that's it. And I think, just jumping onto the next story here in Car Deal quickly, and there's, I think Robert Forrester has responded that, he welcomes the necessary ECG despite dealer confusion, that, it gives it a positive response to the grant, which couldn't come at a better time. but it remains unclear when dealers will actually be able to start dishing out discounts. I like that bit, and that manufacturers are currently applying for the discounts on each of their individual models. So clearly, Robert has those same questions as to, what qualifies, what doesn't qualify, what level, what band does it qualify, and when can you start to pass this on to a consumer. He goes on in the story, talking about the government's latest move to boost electric vehicle uptake is both necessary and welcome. The new 650 million ECG will offer up to 3,700. We've been talking about there, and but he does go on to say that EV uptake for private buyers has stalled in recent months. Just under 20% of electric vehicles are now sold to individuals, with the majority going to the fleet and business users. So, it's kind of how much will this, because this money obviously won't be available to the fleet sector because they all get their discounts. So, it's this money that goes to that consumer. So it's going to be one that we're going to have to wait and see. But what we'll do next, we'll play you the extract, which kind of talks about this a little bit in the interview there from earlier in the week with Steve Young. Again, we recorded it on the day of the announcement, so some of this subsequent clarity that we've had that really doesn't clear everything up, still a lot of unknowns, was even more unclear when we were talking about it with Steve on the day. But we'll play that now, so do stay tuned.
Well, I think as you said, we don't have all the details yet, and there's always a bit of double counting going on. If you look at the 63 million, then it includes some NHS spend on electric vehicles, but the NHS would have spent a chunk of money on vehicles of some sort anyway. So, this is not all new money. But I think there's obviously a number of different elements to this. The first one is whether a subsidy on new cars actually makes any sense anyway, and whether it's a meaningful amount of money. I think the question is whether the consumers will actually see any difference, because the £3,000 or whatever from the government might just be £3,000 less that the manufacturer has to put into supporting the pricing. And so the industry might breathe a sigh of relief, but the consumer won't actually see any difference whatsoever. So I'm not sure financially that's so important. I think it is important that there's a strong signal. I think that the messages from government on electric vehicles have been so messed up for the last 2 or 3 years that customers, genuinely don't know what's going on. So at least this does demonstrate with a meaningful, or an apparently meaningful sum of money, that we are on a road to electrification, and consumers can have some confidence in that. So I think that's more important than the money itself. I think about supporting the home industry. Well, the reality is that we, although it saddens me to say so, we don't really have a home industry in terms of manufacturing. Certainly not at the level of £37,000 and below for passenger cars. We're great at the top end stuff, and we do have Nissan and we've got Toyota, but the only electric car that would qualify that was produced in the UK would be the Leaf when it goes back into production next year. I mean, at the moment you can't buy a Leaf. So I think that the whole thing is really, frankly, a bit of a mess. It gets a headline. If I was going to put £650 million in, I wouldn't put it into a new car support.
Yeah,
it's not actually that meaningful in terms of the amount of money that has been put in. SMMT talks about £6.5 billion that's been spent by the industry on supporting the sale of electric vehicles over the last couple of years since we've had the ZEV mandate. So the money that the government's putting in over the next 3 years is 10% of what the industry's put in 18 months.
Yeah.
So we could go on about this forever.
It is that, yeah. And I suppose it's the question that, because retail or consumer private registrations is basically an all-time low. It's, we know that the market is being underpinned by the fleet and business sector. And to your point earlier, the majority of vehicles are on some kind of finance offering, be it PCP or other. And therefore, when you start to look at anything from 1,500 to 3,750 in the bigger scheme of things, when it comes down to a monthly payment, it's not going to really move that dial, is it?
Well, particularly when the residuals could easily move by more than that amount in over the 3-year term. So the real issue that we have is weak demand for the used BEVs, which are dependent on retail demand, whereas the new sales are to some extent incentivized by the tax treatment for salary sacrifice and so on. So it's the used vehicle market that we need to focus on to make customers confident that they can buy a used electric car and should do. And the more support that goes into the front end, the more that depresses the residual values at the back end.
Well, I think Steve's absolutely spot on there. Two points that sort of resonated with me was the symbolism of introducing a grant. It's now on the radar of car buyers and certainly will become more so. It will be promoted, which is a good thing. But he does touch on the impact or lack of impact, lack of incentive for the used car market, which takes us on to our next story, which is from AM. And the headline there is Used EV Market Risk Due to Impact of New Electric Car Grant. And it really does sort of follow on from what Steve was saying about, okay, when you start reducing at the front end with a subsidy, that hits the residual at the back end. And I know this is something that you've been talking about this week, certainly as part of your role at the Vehicle Remarketing Association.
Yeah, and it's something that, ourselves at the VRA and the BVLA have been sort of vocal about recently is obviously, the new car side will kind of happen anyway because of the ZEV mandate and the VETS targets and the CAFE targets in the global sector. And obviously, the manufacturers are pushing hard to transition to a new energy vehicle marketplace. You've got your corporations that have got an ESG messaging to deliver. So if you talk to people within that sector, they've got to move to a sustainable marketplace if they're running their fleet. Yeah. But you need that back end. You need that used car buyer to take these vehicles because they're coming off very quickly now. If you think about the acceleration of new, all right, that's still, as in Robert's words, stalled. But there's a lot in the market that are coming off contracts, coming off a lease or a fleet or a PCP or some kind of funding, and they're entering the market. And that's what we're starting to see, where you get that oversupply of used battery electric vehicles, or, they just come into the market and they look very expensive against what you can get new. And that's the problem now. And that's the risk that if, depending on who is eligible and how they assign the discounts and the grants, will that put further pressure on that particular 0 to 12, 0 to 24 month market, which makes them second-hand ones that have already been, severely, declining financially in their residual values over the last 24 to 36 months. Will that add further pressure and make them look even more expensive and unaffordable when you start to compare them with what you can get new? Because you look at that used one, and the majority are on some kind of finance. So you're comparing a monthly payment. And that's the big thing that ourselves, me, in both the VRA and Cox Automotive, and you've got Toby Poston there from the BVLA, have been trying to talk about quite a bit, and just feel that the government have a lack of understanding of the complexity of our sector at the minute.
Yeah, and you're quoted within this story, so I'll spare your blushes. You mentioned Toby Poston, who's chief exec of the PVRLA, and he really does pick up on that point because although he welcomes the grant for its potential impact on retail uptake, he does actually warn of those serious repercussions for the EV market. And he goes on to say that stimulating new EV registrations without supporting the used market risks creating an even greater supply and demand imbalance. And he goes on to say the resulting losses will erode confidence and lead to higher finance costs for new EVs, eliminating much of the benefit from the grant. So really sort of crystallizing what we've already been discussing.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm sure this is like anything else. This will roll on for some weeks, won't it, Curtis, on the
We will be
podcast?
returning. We'll be returning to this subject soon, probably next week.
We certainly will. So we'll be back after this brief break with the rest of the second half of this week's headlines.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are on your podcast feed.
So the next headline comes from Car Dealer, and it is Peugeot dealer network mobilised to help fix Citroens with faulty airbags. So this is an update on a story that's been brewing over the last week to 10 days, and it's regarding a number of Citroens and DSs, in fact 120,000 models, and it's owners of second generation Citroen C3s built between 2009 and 2016, as well as DS3 models built between 2009 and 2019. So, but both of those have been affected by a faulty airbag recall, and that figure, it's enormous, and
Yes.
owners have been notified. And I think what's possibly happened is the Citroen network has been overwhelmed. So Stellantis, as the parent, has opened up capacity within the Peugeot network, which seems like a really shrewd move. Whether or not it's been welcomed by the Peugeot network is another thing. But in terms of addressing issues by customers who have effectively been told not to drive those cars.
Yeah, I think as you say there, it has various impacts. You've got the impact of obviously the driver that, as you said there, Curtis, they've been told that to stop driving. It's not just a recall and get it booked in at your own convenience. They've told them not to drive the vehicle. So that starts to put, as you say, pressure on that aftermarket, where that's because they'll all want a courtesy car of some sort or some kind of rental. So, it'll have an impact as we enter the holiday season on the rental sector, because they'll be using up that rental market to loan cars to customers. It then stops those dealers being able to buy potentially used cars from the market because they can't get them through their workshops because they're at capacity trying to get these recalls in, which is where, like you say, this now is trying to expand it across their Peugeot network. But then how much does it start to impact on the Peugeot network, depending on what their overhead absorption is for their after sales, through retail work, because we all know that retail after sales work is a lot more financially beneficial to the dealer than internal and recalls from the manufacturer. So it has a huge knock-on effect. So I'm hearing reports now that people are not buying, or dealers are not buying Citroen and DS product. Even the newer stuff, they're still not buying it because they've just not got the capacity to get them into the prep, get them serviced and through ready to retail. So it is a big impact on the sector. And like you say, it's a lot of cars that.
Yeah, and certainly during the week, the Car Dealer reported on logistics, really advising some of those independent dealers that if you've got these cars on your forecourt, you need to get them. You need to get them off your inventory. You need to get them repaired, but don't sell them. And Yeah, we're talking about a job that takes 1.5 hours. So it's not a quick fix, this, because you start multiplying 1.5 hours by 120,000 vehicles. And, this is going to have a big impact. And it could go on for a number of weeks, if not months, to actually catch up and rectify.
Yeah, and you think about that independent dealer sector, the supermarket sector that will have these vehicles on their forecourt. It'll be a prime, part of their used profile, and they've got to stop selling them, get them through the workshop, and take them to a franchise dealer that can do the recall and repair. So yeah, I think this will. It'd be interesting to see what the actual financial impacts would be of this when it's all calculated through and finished. But we will keep an eye on that one. But heading back to AM Online, it was a story that we missed last week, and we'll go light on this one because we have got a good friend, both of the podcast and generally a good friend of us, of Curtis and myself, Mr. John O'Hanlon, who in the story it's Waylands adds 3 new brands to portfolio through acquisition. So their latest acquisition will boost Wayland's annual revenue by tens of millions. Waylands expands operating area into Wales for the first time. And this is, it's a great move from John and his exec team there. And as you said about the offset there, they bought the HSH Motor Group, and that has taken them with Honda, Omoda, and JQ dealers within their franchise lineup now. So, that's a fantastic acquisition there, and that's going into Cardiff and Bristol. And this is adding to their already Kia, MG, Polestar, and Volvo franchise lineup. But hopefully, in a couple of weeks, we'll have John on, and he'll hopefully talk us a little bit more detail around this, won't he?
Yeah, and you're right. It's a great move because it adds those 3 franchises and adds a dealership site in Bristol, as well as Cardiff. So first site in Wales as Wayland's progressively goes west. So I wonder if that's a song that's John O'Hanlon is singing to himself.
Let's find out when we get him on.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, and as you say, Phil, we'll be talking to John about this and an update on Wayland's generally in just a couple of weeks' time.
We will. And the final story of this week, and Curtis at the intros alluded to this, and just how regular can this be, Curtis, is the big question.
You can't make this up.
Is it one in, one out? Is it going to get to a point of 1 in, 1 out in time?
Maybe.
Sure.
This is the 3rd consecutive week where we've announced a new Chinese brand. And in fact, the last 2 weeks, I think there's been 2 new Chinese brands, but only 1 this week.
Well, yeah. So it's Motor Trade News, and this is that Jamil Motors and GAC have formed a UK joint venture to launch their EV range, and this is that they've signed this joint venture together to distribute electric vehicles in the UK, with the first models set for delivery in Q1 2026. So moving very quickly, don't they? They make these announcements and deals and then move very quickly into the network. But this is a significant move for these.
Yeah, because back in the day when we used to have new brands being launched, which were
you know about it 2 years in advance.
Yeah. I'm going back to Daewoo. I remember when Daewoo was launched, and that was quite sort of revolutionary at the time because it's a new brand, and a lot of the Japanese brands, the Korean brands were already well established back then, and this is going back further than 20 years. We were talking about 20 years at the beginning of the show. This is probably going back 30 years. But it's another new brand, GAC, so that they'll be imported by Jamil Motors, who I don't know an awful lot about them. I know they're Saudi based, and they import the Farazan EV vans, which are made by Geely. So they've been in the UK since early 2024. So this will be their second franchise. And I think certainly a distributor to watch, because, two brands there, both EVs. I can't imagine they're going to stop there. They're going to be looking at other brands to bring here as well.
No, and I think they have announced that initially they were bringing in two segment vehicles, one in the C segment with the Ion V, if that's how you pronounce it, which is a C segment SUV, and then an Ion UT, which is a B segment hatchback, which they'll be coming straight in with, but saying that they'll be offered through selected retail partners, with deliveries expected by the end of Q1 2026, and that is pending regulatory and approvals. So, I think antitrust approvals as well with that. So again, adds further competition and positively adds choice for the consumer. But it's a very interesting one. This one, as you say, we're talking about Shanghai, we're talking about Geely, we're talking about Chery, and now these coming into the UK. But GAC is one of China's largest automotive manufacturers, and just in 2024, it recorded more than 100,000 overseas sales of its self-branded vehicles, and a 92% year-on-year increase. So they've already put in volume into the market across other territories.
That's an important point, isn't it? Because the sort of popular misconception is that these brands coming to the UK are brand new, but they're not. They have got some heritage. They've been active in the Asian markets for a number of years. And I think one of the things that Steve Young, in his interview about Omoda and Jaco, pointed out that some of them have an established portfolio of cars ready to bring to the UK. And it'll be interesting to see what GAC adds to the mix.
Yeah. I think again, it's going to be keeping us busy anyway, Curtis, if nothing else, each week with the headlines. But that's it for this week. So hopefully we've I don't know if we've given you more clarity or complexity on the electric car grant. We are trying to work around all of that, but obviously in time it will become a little bit more clear, and then we can sort of try and understand some of the impacts on the sector, as how it might boost new or impact the used sector. But I think next week you've got a guest on, because I'm off next week, so I get to join, have a week off and be a listener.
Yes, We've given you a week off. You can hang up your headphones and mic, and I'll be joined by friend of the pod, David Billsborough, who runs Cheshire Cars and independent used car dealer. So we'll be able to really sort of talk about some of the implications for used cars, especially on the back of the grants, plus many, many other things. So looking forward to that. Yeah.
So stay tuned for that next week, and other interviews that we may have coming up as well. But thank you in advance, David, for doing that.
But that's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.